fade in. Boop. Maybe. Hello. Yeah. Last minute stuff to take care of. The rate says it's pretty high. That's cool. Sorry, bot's open. Cool. Until the stream elements gives its wonderful notice that I'm on. Okay, the email went out. Twitter post has not gone out yet. I rely far too much on these bots. But anyway, coming soon to a stream near you. It's me. Yes, that weirdly, mildly annoying wolf. Can't seem to figure out what he's doing half the time, but he doesn't really care because he's enjoying himself. Anyway, here I am talking to myself, checking to make sure everything is going right so far. So far, not everything's working, but hey, that's what streaming's all about, is stuff. Okay, the Twitter post still hasn't gone out. I may have to do it manually. I may do it manually anyway. Nope, still has not gone out. Looks like I will be doing it manually. So, I will. I'm posting manually. Don't put tags or anything on it, just give the link because sorry about using the banhammer on their own posts. That's just weird. But hey, weird is what we do. Why is it moving so slow? Come on, model. What are you doing? What are you doing, model? Come on, everything's up, smoothing. Oh, nice. I need to do a minimum. That's not what I need to do. I need to learn how to use my stuff better. But hey, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it's scuff. Showing snakes. Yeah. Oh, come on. I recalibrate and everything slowed down. What the hell? Oh. Next order. Yeah. So, I hope everyone's had a good Friday. If it is still Friday for you, if not, I hope you had a good Friday. Man, why can I not get the mouth to work properly on here? Am I just lagging myself down that much? Okay, it says it's using a microphone. The microphone thing is going. Not really using mouse input for this. Camera. Not using the camera. What is it on here? Studio cam. Whatever. Yeah. CPU performance. Quality tracking. Yeah. Link support. Tracking. I only have face tracking, so that's no biggie there. Camera on. But I'm not using my webcam, so just using my phone. Link sensitivity. Open thought sensitivity way up there. Sensitivity. This is all settings if I'm using my webcam. What the hell am I doing? Oh well. Anyway. If I tilt my head down, I look sadder. Anyway. It says all my bots are here. Fossa, Stream Elements, Sound Alerts, Storybot, Pokemon Communicate, Nightbot. Don't know if Sound Alerts is going to work or not. Nope, Sound Alerts is still fucked. Well, damn. Oh well. Really wish I could get the mouse sync to work properly. It's working fine before I got online. Oh well. We are already 8 minutes into me goofing off. Come on. Well, I can at least yawn. Man, I feel like I should be reading Norwegian stories tonight since it's like 23 degrees Fahrenheit in this wonderfully bland Texas area. So I'm going to go ahead and take us over to the, reading room. And we are going to be reading more fairy tales from the Blue Fairy book. Because stuff. I like my announcement though. It's like, once upon a time, there was a king who had many sons. This is their story. Dun dun! If no one got the reference or anything. Hopefully you did. Maybe people in the States might. I don't know about other countries. Anyway, we are 10 minutes in, so let me open the wonderful blue book. And we will get started. Because, well, it's a dark, cold night, and we need fairy tales by a fire to warm up. It literally took 10 minutes for that to post. Way to drop the bomb, steam ball. Way to drop the ball, steam elements. Anyway. Let me make sure my audio is playing. Refresh. Do I hear it? I don't hear it. Okay, there it goes. Anyway, the first story for tonight, Cubs, is The Master-Maid. Once upon a time, there was a king who had many sons. I do not know exactly how many there were, but the youngest of them could not stay quietly at home, and was determined to go out into the world and try his luck. And after a long time the king was forced to give him leave to go. When he had travelled about for several days, he came to a giant's house, and hired himself to the giant as a servant. In the morning the giant had to go out into the pasture his goats, and as he was leaving the house he told the king's son that he must clean out the stable. "After you have done that," he said, "you need not do any more work today, for you have come to a kind master, and that you shall find. But what I set you to do must be done both well and thoroughly, and you should on no account go into any of the rooms which lead out of the room in which you slept last night. If you do, I will take your life." "Well, to be sure, he is an easy master," said the prince to himself as he walked up and down the room, humming and singing, for he thought there would be plenty of time left to clean out the stable. But it would be amusing to steal a glance into the other rooms as well, thought the prince, for there must be something he is afraid of my seeing, as I am not allowed to enter them. So he went into the first room. A cauldron was hanging from the walls. It was boiling, but the prince could see no fire under it. "I wonder what is inside it," he thought, and dipped a lock of his hair in, and the hair became just as if it were made all of copper. "That's a nice kind of soup. If anyone were to taste that, his throat would be gilded," said the youth, and then he went into the next chamber. There, too, a cauldron was hanging from the wall, bubbling and boiling, but there was no fire under this either. "I will just try what this is like, too," said the prince, thrusting another lock of his hair into it, and it came out silvered over. "Such costly soup is not to be had in my father's palace," said the prince, "but everything depends on how it tastes." Then he went into the third room. There, too, was a cauldron hanging from the wall, boiling exactly the same as the other two rooms, and the prince took pleasure in trying this also. So he dipped a lock of his hair, and it came out so brightly gilded that it shone again. "Some talk about going from bad to worse," said the prince, "but this is better and better. If he boils gold here, what can he boil in there?" He determined to see, and went through the door into the fourth room. No cauldron was to be seen there, but on a bench someone was seated, who was like a king's daughter, but whoever she was so beautiful that that never in the prince's life had he seen her equal. "Oh, what in heaven's name are you doing here?" she said, who sat upon the bench. "I took the place of a servant here yesterday," said the prince. "May you soon have a better place if you have come here to serve here," she said. "Oh, but I think have got a kind master," said the prince. "He has not given me hard work to do today. When I have cleaned out the stable, I shall be done." "Yes, but how will you be able to do that?" she asked again. "If you clean it out as other people do, 10 pitchforkfuls will come in for every one you throw out. But I will teach you how to do it. You must turn your pitchfork upside down and work with the handle, and then all will fly out on its own accord." "Yes, I will attend to that," said the prince, and stayed sitting where he was the whole day, for it was soon settled between them that they would marry each other, he and the king's daughter, so the first day of his service with the giant did not seem long to him. But when evening was drawing near, she said that it was now be better for him to go and clean out the stable before the giant came home. When he got there, he had a fancy to try if what she had said were true. So he began to work in the same way that he had seen the stable boys doing in his father's stables. But soon he saw that he must give up. For when he had worked a very short time, he had scarcely any room left to stand. So he did what the princess had taught him, turned the pitchfork around, and worked with the handle. And in the twinkling of an eye the stable was clean, as if it had been scoured. When he had done that, he went back again into the room in which the giant had given him leave to stay. And there he walked backward and forward on the floor, and began to hum and sing. Then came the giant home with his goats. "Have you cleaned the stable?" asked the giant. "Yes, now it is clean and sweet, master," said the king's son. "I shall see about that," said the giant, and went round to the stable, but it was just as the prince had said. "You certainly have been talking to my Master-Maid, for you never got that out of your own head," said the giant. "Master-Maid? What kind of thing is that, master?" said the prince, making himself look as stupid as an ass. "I should like to see that." "Well, you will see her quite soon enough," said the giant. On the second morning the giant had again to go out with his goats, so he told the prince that on that day he was to fetch home his horse, which was out on the mountainside, and when he had done that he might rest himself for the remainder of the day. "For you have come to a kind master, and that you shall find," said the giant once more. "But do not go into any of the other rooms that I spoke of yesterday, or I will wring your head off," he said, and with that he went away with his flock of goats. "Yes, indeed, you are a great master," said the prince. "But I will go in and talk to the Master-Maid again. Perhaps before long she may like better to be mine than yours." So he went to her. Then she asked him what he had to do that day. "Oh, not very dangerous work, oh, "Oh, not very dangerous work, I fancy," said the king's son. "I only have to go up to the mountainside after his horse." "Well, how do you mean to set about it?" asked the Master-Maid. "Oh, there is no great art in riding a horse home," said the king's son. "I think I must have ridden friskier horses before now." "Yes, but it is not an easy thing as you think to ride the horse home," said the Master-Maid. "But I will teach you what to do. When you go near it, fire will burst out from its nostrils like flames from a pine torch. But be careful, and take the bridle which is hanging by the door there, and fling the bit straight into its jaws, and then it will become so tame that you will be able to do what you like with it." He said he would bear this in mind, and then he again sat in there the whole day with the Master-Maid, and they chatted and talked of one thing and another. But the first thing, and now the last, was how happy and delightful it would be if they could but marry each other, and get safely away from the giant. But the prince would have forgotten both the mountainside and the horse if the Master-Maid had not reminded him of them as evening was drawing near, and said that now it would be better if he went to fetch the horse before the giant came. So he did this, and took the bridle what was hanging by the crook, and strode up the mountainside, and it was not long before he met with the horse, and the fire and red flame streamed forth out of its nostrils. But the youth carefully watched for his opportunity, and just as it was rushing at him with open jaws, he threw the bit straight into its mouth. And the horse stood there, as quiet as a young lamb. And there was no difficulty at all getting the horse home to the stable. Then the prince went back into his room again, and began to hum and to sing. Toward the evening the giant came home. "Have you fetched the horse back from the mountainside?" he asked. "That I have, master. It was an amusing horse to ride, but I rode him straight home, and put him in the stable too," said the young prince. "I will see about that," said the giant, and went out to the stable. But the horse was standing there, just as the prince had said. "You have certainly been talking with my Master-Maid, for you never got that out of your own head," said the giant again. "Yesterday, master, you talked about this Master-Maid, and today you are talking about her. Ah, heaven bless you, master. Why will you not show me the thing? For it would be a real pleasure to me to see it," said the prince, who again acted to be silly and stupid. "Oh, you will see her quite soon enough," said the giant. On the morning of the third day, the giant again had him go into the wood with the goats. "Today you must go underground and fetch my taxes," he said to the prince. "When you have done this, you may rest for the remainder of the day, for you shall see what an easy master you have come to." And then he was away. "Well, however easy a master as you may be, you set me very hard work to do," thought the prince. "But I will see if I cannot find your Master-Maid. You say she is yours, but for all that she may be able to tell me what to do now." And he went back to her. So when the Master-Maid asked him what the giant had set before him to do today, he told her that he was to go underground and get his taxes. Tax collecting. "And how will you set about that?" said the Master-Maid. "Oh, you must tell me how to do it," said the prince, "for I have never yet been underground, and even if I knew the way, I do not know how much I am to demand." "Oh, yes, I will tell you what to do. You must go to the rock there under the mountain ridge, and take a club that is there, then knock on the rocky wall," said the Master-Maid. "Then someone will come out who will sparkle with fire. You should tell him your errand, and when he asks you how much you want to have, you are to say, 'As much as I can carry.'" "Yes, I will keep that in mind," said he, and then he sat there with the Master-Maid the whole day, until night drew near. And he would gladly have stayed there till now, if the Master-Maid had not reminded him that it was time to be off to fetch the taxes before the giant came. So he set out on his way, and did exactly as the Master-Maid had told him. He went to the rocky wall, and took the club, and knocked on it. Then came one so full of sparks that they flew both out of his eyes and his nose. "What do you want?" said he. "I have come here for the giant, and demand the taxes for him," said the king's son. "How much do you want, then?" said the other. "I ask for no more than I am able to carry with me," said the prince. "Well, it is for you to not ask for a horse load," said he who came out of the rock. But now, come in with me. This the prince did, and what a quantity of gold and silver he saw! It was lying inside the mountain, like heaps of stones in waste place, and he got a load that was as large as he was able to carry, and with that he went on his way. So in the evening, when the giant came home with the goats, the prince went into the chamber and hummed and sang again, as he had done the previous 2 evenings. What have you been for the tax? Said the giant. Yes, that I have, master, said the prince. Where have you put it, then? Said the giant again. The bag of gold is standing there on the bench, said the prince. I will see about that, said the giant, and went away to the bench. But the bag was standing there, and it was so full that gold and silver dropped out when the giant untied the string. You have certainly been talking with my Master-Maid, said the giant, and if you have, I will wring your neck. Master-Maid, said the prince. Yesterday my master talked about this Master-Maid, and today he's talking about her again. And the first day of all it was talk of the same kind. I do wish I could see the thing myself, he said. Yes, you will tomorrow, said the giant, and then I myself will take you to her. Ah, master, I thank you, but you are only mocking me, said the king's son. The next day the giant took him to the Master-Maid. Now you shall kill him and boil him in the great big cauldron you know of, and when you have got the broth ready, give me a call, said the giant. Then he lay down on a bench to sleep, and almost immediately began to snore, so that it sounded like a thunder among the hills. So the Master-Maid took a knife and cut the prince's little finger, and dropped 3 drops of blood onto a wooden stool. And then she took all the old rags and shoe soles, and all the rubbish she could lay her hands on, and put them in the cauldron. And then she filled a chest with gold dust, and a lump of salt, and a water flask, which was hanging by the door. And she also took with her a golden apple, and 2 gold chickens. And then she said, she and the prince went away with all the speed they could, and when they had gone a little way they came to the sea. And then they sailed, but where they got the ship from I've never really been able to find out. Now, when the giant had slept a good long time, he began to stretch himself out on the bench on which he was lying. Will it soon boil? He said. It is just beginning, said the first drop of blood on the stool. So the giant lay down on the bench to sleep again, and slept for a long, long time. Then he began to move about a little again. Will it be soon ready now? He said, but he did not look up this time any more than he had done the first time, for he was still half asleep. Half done, said the second drop of blood, and the giant believed it was the Master-Maid again, and turned himself on the bench, and lay down to sleep once more. When he had slept again for many hours, he began to move and stretch himself. Is it not done yet? He said. It is quite ready, said the third drop of blood. Then the giant began to sit up and rub his eyes, but he could not see who it was who had spoken to him, so he asked for the Master-Maid and called her. But there was no one to give him an answer. Well, she must have stolen out for a little, thought the giant. And then he took a spoon and went off to the cauldron to have a taste. But there was nothing in it but old shoes and rags and such trumpery as that, and all was boiled up together, so that he could not tell whether it was porridge or milk pottage. When he saw this, he understood what had happened, and fell into such a rage that he hardly knew what he was doing. Away he went after the prince and the Master-Maid, so fast that the wind whistled behind him, and it was not long before he came to the water, but he could not get over it. Well, well, I will soon find a cure for that. I have only to call my river sucker. And the giant did, and he did call him. So his river sucker came and lay down, and drank 1, 2, 3 draughts, and with that the water in the sea fell so low that the giant saw the Master-Maid and the prince out on the sea in their ship. "Now you must throw the lump of salt," said the Master-Maid. And the prince did so, and it grew into such a great high mountain right across the sea that the giant could not come over it, and the river sucker could not drink any more water. Well, well, I will soon find a cure for that, said the giant, and he called his hill boar to come and bore through the mountain, so that the river sucker might be able to drink up the water again. But just as the hole was made, and the river sucker was beginning to drink, the Master-Maid told the prince to throw 1 or 2 drops out of the flask. And then he did this, and the sea instantly became full of water again. And before the river sucker could take 1 drink, they reached the land and were in safety. So they determined to go home to the prince's father, but the prince would on no account permit the Master-Maid to walk there, for he thought that it was unbecoming either for her or for him to go on foot. "Wait here in the least little bit of time while I go home for the 7 horses which stand in my father's stable," he said. "It is not far off, and I shall not be long away, but I will not let my betrothed bride go on foot to the palace." "Oh, no, do not do that, for if you go home to the king's palace, you will forget me. I foresee that." "How could I forget you? We have suffered so much evil together, and love each other so much," said the prince, and he insisted on going home for the coach with the 7 horses, and she was to wait for him there, by the seashore. So at last the Master-Maid had to yield, for he was so absolutely determined to do it. "But when you get there, you must not even give yourself time to greet anyone, but go straight into the stable and take the horses and put them in the coach and drive back as quickly as you can, for they will all come round you. But you must behave as if you did not see them, and on no account must you taste anything, for if you do, it will cause great misery both to you and to me," she said, and he promised. But when he got home to the king's palace, one of his brothers was just going to be married, and the bride and all of her kith and kin had come to the palace. So they all thronged around him and questioned him about this and that, and wanted him to go in with them. But he behaved as if he did not see them, and went straight into the stable. He got out the horses and began to harness them. When they saw that they could not by any means prevail on him to go in with them, they came out to him with meat and drink, and the best of everything that they had prepared for the wedding. But the prince refused to touch anything, and would do nothing but put the horses on as quickly as he could. At last, however, the bride's sister rolled an apple across the yard to him, and said, "As you won't eat anything else, you may at least take a bite of that, for you must be both hungry and thirsty after your long journey." And he took up the apple and bit a piece out of it. But no sooner had he got the piece of apple in his mouth than he forgot the Master-Maid, and that he was to go back in the coach to fetch her. "I think I must be mad. What do I want with this coach and horses?" he said. And then he put the horses back into the stable and went into the king's palace. And there it was settled that he should marry the bride's sister, who had rolled the apple to him. The Master-Maid sat by the seashore for a long, long time, waiting for the prince, but no prince came. So she went away, and when she walked a short distance, she came to a little hut which stood all alone in a small wood, hard by the king's palace. She entered it and asked if she might be allowed to stay there. The hut belonged to an old crone, who was also an ill-tempered and malicious troll. At first she would not let the Master-Maid remain with her, but at last, after a long time, by means of good words and good payment, she obtained leave. But the hut was as dirty and black inside as a pigsty, so the Master-Maid said that she would smarten it up a little, that it might look a little more like what other people's houses looked inside. The old crone did not like this either. She scowled and was very cross, but the Master-Maid did not trouble herself about that. She took out her chest of gold and flung a handful of it or so into the fire, and the gold boiled up and poured out over the whole hut, until every part of it, both inside and out, were gilded. But when the gold began to bubble up, the old hag grew so terrified that she fled as if the evil one himself were pursuing her. And she did not remember to stoop down as she went to the doorway, and so she split her head open and died. The next morning the sheriff came traveling by there. He was greatly astonished when he saw the gold hut shining and glittering, and there in the copse, and he was still more astonished when he went in and caught sight of a beautiful maiden who was sitting there. He fell in love with her at once, and straightway on the spot he begged her, both prettily and kindly, to marry him. But you do have a great deal of money, said the Master-Maid. Oh, yes, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not all ill off, said the sheriff. So now he had to go home and get the money, and in the evening he came back, bringing with him a bag or two of bushels in it, which he set down on the bench. Well, he had such a fine lot of money, the Master-Maid said she would have him. So they sat down to talk. But scarcely had they sat down together before the Master-Maid wanted to jump up again. I've forgotten to see to the fire, she said. Why should you jump up to do that? Said the sheriff. I will do that. So he jumped up and went to the chimney in one bound. Just tell me when you've got hold of the shovel, said the Master-Maid. Well, I have hold of it now, said the sheriff. Then you may hold the shovel, and the shovel you. Pour red-hot coals over you till day dawns, said the Master-Maid. So the sheriff had to stand there the whole night and pour red-hot coals over himself, and no matter how much he cried and begged and entreated, the hot coals did not grow the colder for that. When the day began to dawn and he had the power to throw down the shovel, he did not stay long where he was, but ran away as fast as he possibly could. And everyone who met him stared and looked after him, for he was flying as if he were mad, and he could not have looked worse if he had been both flayed and tanned, and everyone wondered where he had been, but for the very shame he would tell no one. The next day the attorney came riding by the place where the Master-Maid dwelt. He saw how brightly the hut shone and gleamed through the wood, and he went into to see who lived there. And when he entered and saw the beautiful young maiden, he fell even more in love with her than the sheriff had. So he began to woo her at once. So the Master-Maid asked him, as she had asked the sheriff, if he had a great deal of money. And the attorney said he was not ill off for that, and would at once go home and get it. And at night he came back with a big sack of money. This time it was 4 bushel sack, and set it on the bench by the Master-Maid. So she promised to have him, and he sat down on the bench by her to arrange about it. But suddenly she said she had forgotten to lock the door of the porch that night, and must do it. "Why must you do that?" said the attorney. "Sit still, and I will do it." So he was on his feet in a moment, and out on the porch. "Tell me when you have got hold of the door latch," said the Master-Maid. "I have hold of it now," cried the attorney. "Then you may hold the door, and the door hold you, and may you go between wall and wall until dawn comes." What a dance that attorney had that night! He had never had such a waltz before, and he never wished to have such a dance again. Sometimes he was in front of the door, and sometimes the door was in front of him, and it went from one side of the porch to the other, till the attorney was well nigh beaten to death. At first he began to abuse the Master-Maid, and then to beg and pray, but the door did not care for anything but keeping him where he was till the break of day. As soon as the door let go of its hold of him, off went the attorney. He forgot who ought to be paid off for what he had suffered. He forgot both his sack of money and his wooing, for he was so afraid lest the house door should come dancing after him. Everyone who met him stared and looked after him, for he was flying like a madman, and he could not have looked worse if a herd of rams had been butting at him all night long. On the third day, the bailiff came by, and he too saw the gold house in the little wood, and he too felt that he must go and see who lived there. And when he caught sight of the Master-Maid, he became so much in love with her that he wooed her almost before he greeted her. These guys are thirsty. The Master-Maid answered him as she had answered the others, and that if he had a great deal of money, she would have him. "So far as that is concerned, I am not ill off," said the bailiff. So he was at once told to go home and fetch it, and this he did. At night he came back, and he had a still larger sack of money with him than the attorney had brought. It must have been at least 6 bushels, and he set it down on the bench. That bench is going to fall over. So it was settled that he was to have the Master-Maid, but hardly had he sat down together before she said that she had forgotten to bring in the calf, and must go out to put it in the barn. "No, indeed, you shall not do that," said the bailiff. "I am the one to do it." And, big and fat as he was, he went out briskly as a boy. "Tell me when you've got hold of the calf's tail," said the Master-Maid. Oh, this is yelling. "I have hold of it now," cried the bailiff. "Then may you hold the calf's tail, and the calf's tail hold you, and may you go round the world together till day dawns," said the Master-Maid. So the bailiff had to bestir himself, for the calf went through rough and smooth, over hill and dale, and more the bailiff cried and screamed, the faster the calf went. When daylight began to appear, the bailiff was half dead, and so glad he was to let loose of the calf's tail that he forgot the sack of money and all else. He walked now slowly, more slowly than the sheriff and the attorney had done, but the slower he went, the more time had everyone to stare and look at him, and they were used to it, and no one can imagine how tired out and ragged he looked after his dance with the calf. On the following day, the wedding was to take place in the king's palace, and the older brother was to drive the church with his bride, and the brother who had been with the giant with her sister. But when they had seated themselves in the coach and were about to drive off from the palace, one of the two trace pins broke, and though they made 1, 2, and 3 put on its place, that did not help them, for each broke in turn, no matter what kind of wood they used to make them. This went on for a long time, and they could not get away from the palace, so they were all in great trouble. Then the sheriff said, for he too had been bidden to be the wedding at the court, "Yonder way in the thicket dwells a maiden, and if you can get her to lend you the handle of the shovel that she used to make up her fire, I know very well that it will hold fast." So they sent off a messenger to the thicket, and begged so prettily that they might have a loan of the shovel handle of which the sheriff had spoken, that they were not refused. So now they had a trace pin, which would not snap in two. But all at once, just as they were starting, the bottom of the coach fell in pieces. They made a new bottom as fast as they could, but no matter how they nailed it together, or what kind of wood they used, no sooner had they got the new bottom into the coach and were about to drive off than it broke again, so that they were still worse off than they had been with the broken trace pin. Then the attorney said, for he too was in the wedding at the palace, "Where there in the thicket dwells a maiden, and if you could but have her lend you 1/2 of her porch door, I'm certain that it will hold together." So they sent a messenger again to the thicket, and he begged so prettily for a loan of the gilded porch door, of which the attorney had told him that they got at once. Then they were setting out again, but now the horses were not able to draw the coach. They had 6 horses already, and now they put in 8, and then 10, and then a dozen. But the more they put in, and the more the coachman whipped them, the less good it did, and the coach never stirred from the spot. It was already beginning to be late in the day, and to church they must and would go. But everyone who was in the palace was in a state of distress. Then the beowulf spoke up and said, "Out there in the gilded cottage in the thicket dwells a girl. If you could but get her to lend you her calf, I know it could draw the coach, even if it were as heavy as a mountain." They all thought that was ridiculous to be drawn to church by a calf, but there was nothing else but for it to send a messenger once more, and beg as prettily as they could, on behalf of the king himself, that she would let them have loan of the calf that the bailiff had told them about. The Master-Maid let them have it immediately. This time she said she would not say no. Then they harnessed the calf to see if the coach would move, and away it went, over rough and smooth, over stock and stone, so that they could scarcely breathe. And sometimes they were on ground, and sometimes up in the air. And when they came to the church, the coach again began to go round and round like a spinning wheel. And it was with the utmost difficulty and danger that they were able to get out of the coach and into the church. And when they went back again, the coach went quicker still, so that most of them did not know how they got back to the palace at all. When they had seated themselves at the table, the prince who had been in service of the giant said that they thought they ought to have invited the maiden who had lent them the shovel handle, the porch door, and the calf up to the palace. "For," said he, "if we had not got these 3 things, we should have never gotten away from the palace." The king also thought this was both just and proper, so he sent 5 of his best men down to the gilded hut, to greet the maiden courteously from the king, and to beg her to be so good as to come up to the palace to dinner at midday. Greet the king, and tell him that if he is too good to come to me, and I am too good to come to him, replied the Master-Maid. So the king had to go himself, and the Master-Maid went with him immediately, and as the king believed that she was more than she appeared to be, he seated her in the place of honor by the youngest bridegroom. When they sat at the table for a short time, the Master-Maid took out a cock, then a hen, and the golden apple which she had brought away with her from the giant's house, and set them on the table in front of her, and instantly the cock and the hen began to fight each other for the golden apple. "Oh, look how those two are fighting for the golden apple," said the king's son. "Yes, and so did we too fight to get out of the time when we were in the mountain," said the Master-Maid. So the prince knew her again, and you may imagine how delighted he was. He ordered the troll witch who had rolled the apple to him to be torn to pieces between 4 and 20 horses. Ouch. So that not a bit of her was left. And then, for the first time, they really began to keep the wedding. And, weary as they were, the sheriff, the attorney, and the bailiff kept it up too. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that was actually one of the Nordic tales. Which is funny since I started off the stream talking about needing to read the Nordic tales because it's freaking cold. But anyway. Oh, well, here's another one that I've read before. Oh, well. One of the downsides about reading compilation books is because they're all sourced from different stories, so just the combination of them all together. So this has been both a Nordic and this is the Hans Christian Andersen one too. So why the sea is salt. Once upon a time, long, long ago, there were two brothers, the rich one and the other poor. When Christmas Eve came, the poor one had not a bite in the house, either meat or of bread, and so he went to his brother and begged him, in God's name, to give him something for Christmas Day. It was by no means the first time that the brother had been forced to give something to him, and he was not better pleased at being asked now than he generally was. "If you will do what I ask, you shall have a whole ham," he said. The poor one immediately thanked him and promised this. "Well, here's the ham, and now you must go straight to Dead Man's Hall," said the rich brother, throwing the ham to him. "Well, I will do what I have promised," said the other, and he took the ham and set off. He went on and on for a livelong day, and at nightfall he came to a place where there was a bright light. "I have no doubt this is the place," thought the man with the ham. An old man with a long white beard was standing in the outside chopping Yule logs. "Good evening," said the man with the ham. "Good evening to you. Where are you going at this late hour?" said the man. "I am going to Dead Man's Hall, if only I am on the right track," answered the poor man. "Oh, yes, you're right enough, for here it is," said the old man. "When you get inside, they will all want to buy your ham, for they don't get much meat out here. But you must not sell it unless you can get the hand mill which stands behind the door for it. When you come out again, I will teach you how to stop the hand mill, which is useful for most anything." So the man with the ham thanked the other for his good advice and rapped at the door. When he got in, everything happened just as the old man had said it would. All the people, great and small, came around him like ants on an anthill, and each tried to outbid each other for the ham. Ham. By rights, my old woman, and I ought to have it for our Christmas dinner. But since you have your hearts upon it, I must give it up to you, said the man. But if I sell it, I will have the handmill which is standing there behind the door. At first they would not hear of this, and haggled and bargained with the man. But he stuck to what he said, and the people were forced to give him the handmill. When the man came out again into the yard, and asked the old woodcutter how he was to stop the handmill, and when he had learnt that, he thanked him, and set off with all the speed he could, and did not get there until after the clock had struck 12 on Christmas Eve. No. But where in the world have you been? Said the old woman. Here I've sat waiting hour after hour, and have not even 2 sticks to lay across each other under the Christmas porridge pot. Oh, I could not come home before. I had something of importance to see about, and a long way to go, too, but now you shall just see, said the man, and he set the handmill on the table, and bade it first grind light, then a tablecloth, and then meat and beer and everything else that was good for Christmas Eve supper. And the mill ground all that he ordered. Beer for Christmas. You heard it, Cubs. Bless me, said the old woman, as one thing after another appeared, and she wanted to know where her husband had got the mill from, but he would not tell her that. Never mind where I got it. You can see it is a good one, and the water that turns it will never freeze, said the man. So he ground meat and drink and all kinds of good things, to last all Christmastide, and on the 3rd day he invited all his friends to come to the feast. And now when the rich brother saw all all there was at the banquet and in the house, he was both vexed and angry, for he grudged everything his brother had. On Christmas Eve he was so poor that he came to me and begged for a trifle, for God's sake, and now he gives a feast as if he were both count and a king. Thought, but for heaven's sake, tell me where you got your riches from, said he to his brother. From behind the door, said the owner who owned the mill, for he did not choose to satisfy his brother on that point. But later in the evening, when he had taken a drop too much, he could not refrain from telling how he had come by the handmill. See, you see what has brought me all my wealth, he said, and brought out the mill, and made it grind first one thing then another. When the brother saw that, he insisted on having the mill, and after a great deal of persuasion got it. But he had to give $300 for it, and the poor brother was to keep it till the haymaking was over, for he thought, if I keep it as long as that, I can make it grind meat and drink that will last many a long year. During that time you may imagine that the mill did not grow rusty, and when hay harvest came and the rich brother got it, but the other had taken good measures not to teach him how to stop it, it was evening when the rich man got the mill home, and in the morning he bade the old woman go out and spread the hay after the mowers, and he would attend to the house himself that day. He said. So, when dinner time drew near, he set the mill on the table and said, grind herrings and milk porridge, and do it both quickly and well. So the mill began to grind herrings and milk pottage, and first all the dishes and tubs were filled. Then it came out over the kitchen floor. The man twisted and turned it, and did all he could to make the mill stop. But, however so he turned it and screwed it, the mill went on grinding. and in a short time the pottage rose so high that the man was like to be drowned. So he threw open the parlor door, but it was not long before the mill had ground the parlor full too, and it was with difficulty and danger that the man could go through the steam of pottage, and could not get hold of the door latch. When he got the door open, he did not stay long in the room, but ran out, and the herrings and pottage came after him, and it streamed over both farm and field. Now the old woman was out spreading the hay, began to think dinner was long in coming, and said to the women and mowers, "Though the master does not call us home, we may as well go. It may be that he finds he is not good at making pottage, and I should well do help him." So they began to straggle homeward, but when they got a little way up the hill, they met the herrings and pottage and bread, all pouring forth and winding about one over another, and the man himself in front of the flood. "Would to heaven that each of you had 100 stomachs! Take care that you are not drowned in the pottage!" he cried as he went by them, as if mischief were at his heels, down to where his brother dwelt. Then he begged him, for God's sake, to take the mill back, and in that instant, for, he said, "If I grind one more hour, the whole district will be destroyed in herrings and pottage." But the brother would not take it back until the other had paid him $300, and that he was obligated to do so. Now the poor brother had both the money and the mill again. So it was not long before he had a farmhouse, much finer than that his brother lived in. But the mill ground him so much money that he covered it with plates of gold, and the farmhouse lay close to the seashore, so that it shone and glittered far out to sea. Everyone who sailed by there now had to put up to visit the rich man in the gold farmhouse, and everyone wanted to see the wonderful mill, for the report of it spread far and wide, and there was no one who had not heard tell of it. After a long, long time also came a skipper who wished to see the mill. He asked if it could make salt. "Yes, it could make salt," said he who owned it, and when the skipper heard that, he wished with all his might and main to have the mill, let it cost what it might, for he thought if he had it, he would get off having to sail far away over the perilous sea for freights of salt. At first the man would not hear of parting with it, but the skipper begged and prayed, and at last the man sold it to him, and got many, many $1,000s for it. When the skipper had got the mill on his back, he did not stay there long, for he was so afraid that the man would change his mind, and he had no time to ask how he was to stop it grinding, but got on board his ship as fast as he could. When he had gone a little way out to sea, he took the mill on deck. "Grind, Salt, grind both quickly and well," said the skipper. So the mill began to grind salt, till it spouted out like water, and when the skipper had got his ship filled, he wanted to stop the mill, but whichever way he turned it, and how much he soever tried, it went on grinding, and the heap of salt grew higher and higher, until at last the ship sank. There lies the mill at the bottom of the sea, and still, day by day, it grinds on, and that is why the sea is salt. And that is why you follow instructions when you know them. Because if you don't get salty with me. Okay, Cubs. Another familiar story coming up. I kind of like the fact this has two titles. And I will try my best not to do any weird accents while reading the story, unless it is character driven. So, the next story is The Master Cat, or Puss in Boots. There was a miller who left no more estate to the three sons than he had his mill, his ass, and his cat. The partition was soon made. Neither scrivener nor attorney was sent for. They would soon have eaten up all the poor patrimony. The eldest had the mill, the second the ass, and the youngest nothing but the cat. The poor young fellow was quite comfortless at having so poor a lot. My brothers, said he, may get their living handsomely enough by joining their stocks together, but for my part, when I've eaten up my cat and made a muff of his skin, I must die of hunger. The cat, who heard all this, but made as if he did not, said to him with a grave and serious air, Do not afflict yourself, my good master. You have nothing else to do but give me a bag, and get a pair of boots made for me, that I may scamper through the dirt and the brambles, and you shall see that you have not a bad portion in me as you imagine. Sorry, I could not resist. The cat's master did not build much upon what he said. He had often seen him play a great many cunning tricks to catch rats and mice, and when he used to hang them by the heels, or hide himself in the meal, and make it as if he were dead, so that he did not altogether despair of his affording him some help in his miserable condition. When the cat had what he asked, for he booted himself very gallantly, and putting a bag around his neck, and he held strings of it with his two forepaws, and went into the warren where was a great abundance of rabbits. He put bran and sow thistle into his bag, and stretching out at length, as if he had been dead, he waited for some young rabbits, not yet acquainted with the deceits of the world, to come and to rummage his bag for what he had put in it. Scarce was he laid down, but he had what he wanted. A rash and foolish young rabbit jumped into his bag, and Monsieur Puss, immediately drawing the string closed, took and killed him without pity. Proud of his prey, he went with it to the palace and asked to speak with his majesty. He was shown upstairs to the king's apartment, and, making a low reverence, said to him, I have brought you, sir, a rabbit of the warren, which my noble lord, the Marquis of Carabas, for that title which was Puss was pleased to give his master, has commanded me to present to your majesty from him. Tell thy master, said the king, that I thank him, that he does me a great deal of pleasure. Another time he went and hid himself among some standing corn, holding still his bag open, and when a brace of partridges ran into it, he drew the strings, and so caught them both. He went and made present of these to the king, as he had done with the rabbit, which he took in the warren. The king, in like manner, received the partridges with great pleasure, and ordered him some money for drink. The cat continued for 2 or 3 months thus to carry his majesty, from time to time, game of his master's taking. One day in particular, when he knew for certain that he was to take the air along the riverside, with his daughter, the most beautiful princess in the world, he said to his master, If you will follow my advice, your fortune will be made. You have nothing else but to go and wash yourself in the river, and that part I shall show you, and leave the rest to me. Marquis of Carabas did what the cat advised him to do, without knowing why or wherefore. While he was washing, the king passed by, and the cat began to cry out, Help, help, my master the Marquis de Carabas, he's going to be drowned. At this noise, the king put his head out of the coach window, and, finding it was the cat who had so often brought him such good game, he commanded his guards to run immediately to the assistance of his lordship the Marquis de Carabas. While they were there, drawing the poor Marquis out of the river, the cat came up to the coach and told the king that, while his master was washing, there came by some rogues, and they went off with his clothes, though he had cried out, "Thieves, thieves!" several times as loud as he could. The cunning cat had hidden them under a great stone. The king immediately commanded his officers of his wardrobe to run and fetch one of his best suits for the Lord Marquis de Carabas. The king caressed him after a very extraordinary manner, and as the fine clothes he had given him extremely set off his good mien, for he was made well and very handsome in his person, the king's daughter took a secret inclination to him, and the Marquis of Carabas had no sooner cast 2 or 3 respectful and somewhat tender glances, but she fell in love with him to distraction. The king, who needs him, come to the coach and have part of the airing. The cat, quite overjoyed to see his project begin to succeed, marched on before, and meeting with some countrymen who were mowing the meadow, he said to them, "Good people, you who are mowing, if you do not tell the king that the meadow and you mow belongs to the Marquis of Carabas, you shall be chopped into small bits as herbs for the pot." The king did not fail asking the mowers to whom the meadow they were mowing belonged. "To my lord Marquis de Carabas," answered they all together, for the cat's threats had made them terribly afraid. "You see, sir," said the Marquis, "this is the meadow which never fails to yield a plentiful harvest every year." The master cat, who went still on before, met with some reapers, and said to them, "My good people, you who are reaping, if you do not tell the king that all this corn belongs to the Marquis de Carabas, you shall be chopped as small as herbs for the pot." The king, who passed by the moment after, would need to know whom all that corn which he saw did belong. "To our lord the Marquis de Carabas," replied the reapers, and the king was very well pleased with it, as well as the Marquis, whom he congratulated thereupon. The master cat, who went always before, said the same words to all he met, and the king was astonished at the vast estates by the Lord Marquis de Carabas. Monsieur Puss came at last to a stately castle, the master of which was an ogre. The richest had ever been known, for all the lands which the king had gone over belonged to this castle. The cat, who had taken care to inform himself who this ogre was, and what he could do, asked to speak to him, saying that he could not pass so near his castle without having the honor of paying his respects to him. The ogre received him as civilly as an ogre could do, and made him sit down. "I have been assured," said the cat, "that you have the gift of being able to change yourself into all sorts of creatures that you have mind to. You can, for example, transform yourself into a lion or elephant and the like." "This is true," answered the ogre very briskly, "and to convince you, you shall see me become a lion." Puss was sadly terrified at the sight of a lion so near, that he immediately got into the gutter without abundance of trouble and danger because of his boots, which were of no use to him at all when walking upon the tiles. A little while after, when Puss saw that the ogre had resumed his natural form, he came down, and owned that he had been much frightened. "I have been, moreover, informed," said the cat, "but I know not how to believe it, that you also have the power to take on you the shape of the smallest animals, for example, to change yourself into a rat or a mouse. But I must own to you to take this is impossible." "Impossible?" cried the ogre. "You shall see that presently." And at the same time he changed himself into a mouse, and began to run about the floor. Puss no sooner perceived this, that he fell upon him and ate him up. Meanwhile, the king, who saw as he passed the fine castle of the ogres, had a mind to go into it. Puss, who heard the noise of the Majesty's coach running over the drawbridge, ran out and said to the king, "Your Majesty is welcome to the castle of my lord Marquis de Carabas." "What, my lord Marquis?" cried the king. "And does this castle also belong to you? There can be nothing finer than this court and all the stately buildings which surround it. Let us go in, if you please." The Marquis gave his hand to the princess, and followed the king, who went first. They passed into a spacious hall, where they found a magnificent collation which the ogre had prepared for friends, who were that very day to visit him, but dared not enter, knowing the king was there. His Majesty was perfectly charmed with the good qualities of my Lord Marquis Carabas, as was his daughter, who had fallen violently in love with him, and seeing the vast estate he possessed, said to him, after having drunk 5 or 6 glasses, "It will be owing to yourself only, my Lord Marquis, if you do not my son-in-law." The Marquis, making several low bows, accepted the honour which his Majesty conferred upon him, and forthwith that very day married the princess. Puss became a great lord, and never ran after mice any more, but only as a diversion. Ow. Sorry, I hit the microphone. Okay. Yes, I had to do the accent for Puss. It is only natural that people perceive Puss in Boots to have a Spanish accent for some reason. I cannot say why, especially since the story takes place in France. Oh well. Our next wonderful story, Cubs, is Felicia and the Pot of Pinks. Pot of Pinks? Once upon a time, there was a poor laborer who, feeling that he had not much longer to live, wished to divide his possessions between his son and daughter, whom he both loved dearly. So he called them to him and said, "Your mother brought me as her dowry 2 stools and a straw bed. I have, besides, a hen, a pot of pinks, and a silver ring, which were given me by a noble lady who once lodged in my poor cottage. When she went away, she said to me, 'Be careful of my gifts, good man. See that you do not lose the ring, or forget to water the pinks. As for your daughter, I promise you that I shall be more beautiful than anyone you ever saw in your life. Call her Felicia, and when she grows up, give her the ring and the pot of pinks to console her for her poverty. Take them both then, my dear child," he added, "and your brother shall have everything else." That doesn't sound fair. No. The 2 children seemed quite concerned, and when their father died, they wept for him, and divided his possessions as he had told them. Felicia believed that her brother loved her, but when she sat down upon one of the stools, he said angrily, "Keep your pot of pinks and your ring, but let my things alone. I like order in my house." Felicia, who was very gentle, said nothing, but stood up crying quietly, while Bruno, for that was her brother's name, sat comfortably by the fire. Presently, when supper time came, Bruno had a delicious egg, and he threw the shell to Felicia, saying, "There, that is all I can give you. If you don't like it, go out and catch frogs. There are plenty of them in the marsh close by." Felicia did not answer, but she cried more bitterly than ever, and went away to her own little room. She found it filled with the sweet scent of the pinks, and going up to them, she said sadly, "Beautiful pinks, you are so sweet and pretty. You are the only comfort I have left. Be very sure that I will take care of you, and water you well, and never allow any cruel hand to tear you from your stems." As she leant over them, she noticed that they were very dry. So, taking her pitcher, she ran off in the clear moonlight to the forest, or to the fountain, which was at some distance. When she reached it, she sat down upon the brink to rest, but she had hardly done so when she saw a stately lady coming toward her, surrounded by numbers of attendants. 6 maids of honor carried her train, and she leaned upon the arm of another. When they came near the fountain, a canopy was spread for her, under which was placed a sofa of cloth of gold, and presently a dainty supper was served, upon the table covered with dishes of gold and crystal, while the wind in the trees and the falling water of the fountain murmured the softest music. Felicia was hidden in the shade, too astonished by all she saw to venture to move, but in a few moments the queen said, "I fancy I see a shepherdess near that tree. Better come hither." So Felicia came forward and saluted the queen timidly, but with so much grace that all were surprised. "What are you doing here, my pretty child?" asked the queen. "Are you not afraid of robbers?" "Ah, madam," said Felicia, "a poor shepherdess who has nothing to lose does not fear robbers." "You are not very rich, then?" said the queen, smiling. "I am so poor," answered Felicia, "that a pot of pinks and a silver ring are my only possessions in the world." "But you have a heart," said the queen. "What should you say if anybody wanted to steal that?" "I do not know what it is like to lose one's heart, madam," she replied, "but I have always heard that without a heart one cannot live, and if it is broken one must die, and in spite of my poverty, I should be sorry not to live." "You are quite right to take care of your heart, pretty one," said the queen. "But tell me, have you supped?" "No, madam," answered Felicia. "My brother ate all the supper there was." Then the queen ordered that a place should be made for her at the table, and herself loaded Felicia's plate with good things, but she was too much astonished to be hungry. "I want to know what you were doing at the fountain so late," said the queen presently. "I came to fetch a pitcher of water for my pinks, madam," she answered, stooping to pick up the pitcher which stood beside her. But when she showed it to the queen, she was amazed to see that it had turned to gold, all sparkling with great diamonds, and the water, of which it was full, was more fragrant than the sweetest roses. She was afraid to take it until the queen said, "It is yours, Felicia. Go and water your pinks with it, and let it remind you that the Queen of the Woods is your friend." The shepherdess threw herself at the queen's feet and thanked her humbly for her gracious words. "Ah, madam," she cried, "if I beg you to stay here a moment, I would run and fetch my pot of pinks for you, and they could not fall into better hands." "Go, Felicia," said the queen, stroking her cheek softly. "I will wait here until you come back." So Felicia took up her pitcher and ran to her little room. But while she had been away, Bruno had gone in and taken the pot of pinks, leaving a great cabbage in its place. When she saw the unlucky cabbage, Felicia was much distressed, and did not know what to do. At last she ran back to the fountain, and, kneeling before the queen, said, "Madam, Bruno has stolen my pot of pinks, so I have nothing but my silver ring. But I beg you accept it as proof of my gratitude." "But if I take your ring, my pretty shepherdess," said the queen, "you will have nothing left, and what will you do then?" "Ah, madam," she answered simply, "if I have your friendship, I shall do very well." So the queen took the ring and put it on her finger, and mounted her chariot, which was made of coral studded with emeralds, and drawn by 6 milk-white horses. And Felicia looked after her until the winding of the forest path hid her from sight, and then she went back to the cottage, thinking over all the wonderful things that had happened. The first thing she did when she reached her room was to throw the cabbage out the window. but she was very much surprised to hear an odd little voice cry out, "Oh, I'm half killed," and could not tell where it came from, because cabbages do not generally speak. So as soon as it was light, Felicia, who was very unhappy about her pot of pinks, went out to look for it, and the first thing she found was the unfortunate cabbage. She gave it a push with her foot, saying, "What are you doing here, and how dared you put yourself in the place of my pot of pinks?" "If I hadn't been carried," replied the cabbage, "you may be very sure that I shouldn't have thought of going there." It made her shiver with fright to hear the cabbage talk, understandably, but he went on. "If you will be good enough to plant me by my comrades again, I can tell you where your pinks are at this moment, hidden by Bruno's bed." Felicia was in despair when she heard this, not knowing how she was to get them back. But she replanted the cabbage very kindly in his old place, and as she finished doing it, she saw Bruno's hen, and said, catching hold of it, "Come here, you horrid little creature. You shall suffer for the unkind things my brother has done to me." "Ah, shepherdess," said the hen, "don't kill me. I'm rather a gossip, and I can tell you some surprising things that you will like to hear. Don't imagine that you are the daughter of the poor laborer who brought you up. Your mother is a queen who already had 6 kids already, and the king threatened that unless she had a son who could inherit the kingdom, she should cut off her head." So when the queen had another daughter... Oh, hold on. "So when the queen had another little daughter, she was very frightened, and agreed with her sister, who was a fairy, to exchange her for the fairy's little son. Now the queen had been shut up in a great tower by the king's orders, and when a great many days went by, and she still heard nothing from the fairy, she made her escape from the window by means of a rope ladder, and taking his little baby with her. After wandering about, she was still half dead and cold with fatigue. She reached this cottage. I was the laborer's wife, and was a good nurse, and the queen gave you into my charge, and told me all her misfortunes, and then died before she had time to say what it was become of you." "As I never in my life could keep a secret, I could not help telling the strange tale to my neighbors, and one day a beautiful lady came here, and I told it to her also. When I had finished, she touched me with a wand she held in her hand, and I instantly became a hen. And there I was at the end of my talking. I was very sad, and my husband, who was out when I was kidnapped, never knew what became of me. After seeking me everywhere, he believed that I must have drowned or eaten up by wild beasts in the forest. That same lady came here once and commanded that you should be called Felicia, and left the ring and the pot of pinks to be given to you. And while she was in the house, 25 of the king's guards came to search for you, doubtless meaning to kill you. But she muttered a few words, and immediately they all turned into cabbages. It was one of them whom you threw out your window yesterday." "I don't know how it was that he could speak. I've never heard either of them say a word before, nor have I been able to do so myself until now." The princess was greatly astonished at the hen's story, and said kindly, "I am truly sorry for you, my poor nurse, and wish it was in my power to restore you to your real form. But we must not despair. It seems to me, after what you have told me, that something must be going to happen soon. Just now, however, I must go and look for my pinks, which I love better than anything in the world." Bruno had gone out into the forest, never thinking that Felicia would search in his room for the pinks, and she was delighted by his unexpected absence, and thought to get them back without further trouble. But as soon as she entered the room, she saw a terrible army of rats who were guarding the straw bed. and when she attempted to approach, it sprang at her, biting and scratching furiously. Quite terrified, she drew back, crying out, "Oh, my dear Pinks! How can you stay in here with such bad company?" Then she suddenly bethought herself of the pitcher of water, and hoping that it might have some magic power, she ran to fetch it and sprinkled a few drops over the fierce-looking swarm of rats. At that moment, not a tail or whisker was to be seen. Each one had been made for his hole as fast as his legs could carry him, so that the princess, could safely take her pot of pinks. She found them nearly dying for want of water, and hastily poured all that was left of the pitcher onto them. As she bent over, enjoying their delicious scents, a soft voice that seemed to rustle among the leaves said, "Lovely Felicia, the day has come at last, when I may have the happiness of telling you how even the flowers love you and rejoice in your beauty." The princess, quite overcome by the strangeness of hearing a cabbage, a hen, and a pink speak, and the terrible sight of an army of rats, suddenly became very pale and fainted. At that moment, Bruno came in. Working hard in the heat had not improved his temper, and when he saw that Felicia had succeeded in finding her pinks, he was so angry that he dragged her out into the garden and shut the door upon her. The fresh air soon made her open her pretty eyes, and there before her stood the Queen of the Woods, looking as charming as ever. "You had a bad brother," she said. "I saw he turned you out. Shall I punish him for you?" "Ah, no, madam," she said. "I am not angry with him." "But supposing he was not your brother after all, what would you say then?" asked the Queen. "Oh, but I think he must be," said Felicia. "What?" said the Queen. "Have you not heard that you are a princess?" "I was told a little while ago, madam, but how can I believe it without a single proof?" "Ah, my dear child," said the Queen, "the way you speak assures me that, in spite of your humble upbringing, you are indeed a real princess, and I can save you from being treated in such a way again." She was interrupted at that moment by the arrival of a very handsome young man. He wore a coat of green velvet fastened with emerald clasps, and had a crown of pinks on his head. He knelt upon one knee and kissed the Queen's hand. "Ah," she cried, "my pink, my dear son! What a happiness to see you restored to your natural shape by Felicia's aid." And she embraced him joyfully, and then returning to Felicia, said, "Charming princess, I know all the hen told you, but you cannot have heard that the Zephyrs, to whom was entrusted the task of carrying my son to the tower where the Queen, your mother, so anxiously waited for him, left him instead in a garden of flowers, while they flew off to tell your mother. Whereupon a fairy with whom I had quarrelled changed him into a pink, and I could do nothing to prevent it. You can imagine how angry I was, and how I tried to find some means of undoing the mischief she had done, but there was no help for it. I could only bring Prince Pink back to the place where you were being brought up, hoping that when you grew up he might love you, and by your care be restored to his natural form. And you see everything has come right, as I hoped it would. Your giving me the silver ring was a sign that the power of the charm was nearly over. My enemy's last chance was to frighten you with her army of rats. That she did not succeed in doing, so now, my dear Felicia, if you will be married to my son with a silver ring, your future happiness is certain. Do you think him handsome and amiable enough to be willing to marry him?" "Madam," replied Felicia, blushing, "you overwhelm me with your kindness.
I know that you are my mother's sister, and that by your art you returned the soldiers who were sent to kill me into cabbages, and my nurse into a hen, and that you do me only too much honor in proposing that I should marry your son. How can I explain to you the cause of my hesitation? I feel, for the first time in my life, how happy it would make me to be beloved. Can you indeed give me the prince's heart?
It is yours already, lovely princess, he cried, taking her hand in his. But for the horrible enchantment which kept me silent, I should have told you long ago how dearly I loved you. This made the princess very happy, and the queen, who could not bear to see her dressed like a poor shepherdess, touched her with her wand, saying, I wish you to be attired as befits your rank and beauty. And immediately the princess's cotton dress became a magnificent robe of silver brocade embroidered with carbuncles, and her soft dark hair was encircled by a crown of diamonds, from which flowed a clear white veil. With her bright eyes and charming color in her cheeks, she was altogether such a dazzling sight that the prince could hardly bear it. How pretty you are, Felicia, he cried. Don't keep me in suspense. I entreat you. Say that you will marry me. Ah, said the queen, smiling, I think she will not refuse now. Just then Bruno, who was going back to his work, came out of the cottage, and thought he must be dreaming when he saw Felicia, but she called him very kindly, and begged the queen to take pity on him.
What, she said, when he was so unkind to you? Ah, madam, said the princess, I am so happy that I should like everyone else to be happy too.
The queen kissed her and said,
Well, to pleasure you, let me see what I can do for this cross Bruno.
and with a wave of her wand she turned the poor little cottage into a splendid palace, full of treasures. Only the two stools and the straw bed remained just as they were, to remind him of his former poverty. Then the queen touched Bruno himself, and made him gentle and polite and grateful, and he thanked her and the princess 1,000 times. Lastly, the queen restored the hen and the cabbages to their natural forms, and left them all very contented. The prince and princess were married as soon as possible, with great splendor, and lived happily ever after. Oh, this next one has a song. Damn, I'm gonna have to sing something. And with as long as this one is, it'll probably be the last one for the night. It is, let's see, we are page 154. Where's the end of this one? White cat. Give me a second while I'm looking this up. Da, 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 da. The White Cat. It is 24 pages. Give me a minute a page. This will be the last story of the night. Excuse me. So, our final story for the evening. The White Cat. Once upon a time there was a king who had 3 sons, who were all so clever and brave that he began to be afraid that they would want to reign over the kingdom before he was dead. Now the king, though he felt he was growing old, did not at all wish to give up the government of his kingdom while he could still manage it very well. So he thought the best way to live in peace would be to divert the minds of his sons by promises which he could always get out of when the time came for keeping them. Sounds like a lifelong politician to me. So he sent for them all, and after speaking to them kindly, he added, "You will quite agree with me, my dear children, that my great age makes it impossible for me to look after my affairs of state as carefully as I once did. I begin to fear that this may affect the welfare of my subjects. Therefore, I wish that one of you should succeed to my crown. But in return for such a gift as this, it is only right that you should do something for me. Now, as I think of retiring into the country, it seems to me that a pretty, lively, faithful little dog would be very good company for me. So, without any regard for your ages, I promise that the one who brings me the most beautiful little dog shall succeed me at once." The three princes were greatly surprised by their father's sudden fancy for a little dog, but as it gave the two younger ones a chance they would not otherwise have had of being king, and as the eldest was too polite to make any objection, they accepted the commission with pleasure. They bade farewell to the king, who gave them presents of silver and precious stones, and appointed to meet them at the same hour and the same place, after a year had passed, to see the little dogs they had brought for him. When they went together to a castle which was about a league from the city, accompanied by all their particular friends, to whom they gave a grand banquet, and the three brothers promised to be friends always, to share whatever good fortune befell them, and not be parted by any envy and jealousy. And so they set out, agreeing to meet at the same castle at the appointed time, to present themselves before the king together. Each one took a different road. The two eldest met with many adventures, but it is about the youngest that you are going to hear. He was young and gay and handsome, and he knew everything that a prince ought to know, and for his courage there was simply no end to it. Hardly a day passed without his buying several dogs, big and little, greyhounds, mastiffs, spaniels, and lapdogs. As soon as he bought a pretty one, he was sure to see a still prettier, and then he had to get rid of all the others and buy that one. As being alone, he found it impossible to take 30 or 40,000 dogs about with him. He journeyed from day to day, not knowing where he was going, until at last, just at nightfall, he reached a great, gloomy forest. He did not know his way, and, to make matters worse, it began to thunder, and the rain poured down. He took the first path he could find, and after walking for a long time, he fancied he saw a faint light, and began to hope that he was coming to some cottage where he might find shelter for the night. At length, guided by the light, he reached for the door of the most splendid castle he could have imagined. The door was gold, covered with carbuncles, and it was the pure red light which shone from them that had shown him the way through the forest. The walls were of the finest porcelain, in all the most delicate colors, and the prince saw that all the stories he had ever read were pictured upon them. But as he was terribly wet, and the rain still fell in torrents, he could not stay to look about any more, but came back to the golden door. There he saw a deer's foot hanging by a chain of diamonds. He began to wonder who could live in such a magnificent castle. "I must feel very secure against robbers," he said to himself. "What is it to hinder someone from cutting off the chains and digging out the carbuncles and making himself rich for life?" He pulled the deer's foot, and immediately a silver bell sounded, and the door flew open. But the prince could see nothing but numbers of hands in the air, each holding a torch. He was so much surprised that he stood still until he felt himself pushed forward by other hands, so that, though he was somewhat uneasy, he could not help going forward. With his hand on his sword, to be prepared for whatever might happen, he entered a hall paved with lapis lazuli, while two lovely voices sang. The hands you see floating above will swiftly your bidding obey. If your heart dreads not conquering love, in this place you may fearlessly stay. The prince could not believe that the danger threatened him when he was welcomed in this way, so, guided by the mysterious hands, he went towards the door of coral, which opened of its own accord, and he found himself in a vast hall of mother of pearl, out of which opened a number of other rooms, glittering with thousands of lights, and full of the most beautiful pictures and precious things that the prince felt quite bewildered. After passing through 60 rooms the hands had conducted him stopped, and the prince saw the most comfortable-looking armchair drawn up close to a chimney corner. At the same time the fire lighted itself, and the pretty, soft, clever hands took off the prince's wet and muddy clothes, and presented him with fresh ones made of the richest stuffs, all embroidered with gold and emeralds. He could not help admiring everything he saw, and the deft way in which the hands waited on him, though they sometimes appeared so suddenly that they made him jump. When he was quite ready, and I can assure you that he looked very differently from the wet and weary prince who had stood outside in the rain and pulled the deer's foot, the hands led him to a splendid room, upon the walls of which were painted the histories of Puss and Boots, and a number of other famous cats. The table was laid for supper with 2 golden plates, and golden spoons and forks, and the sideboard was covered with dishes and glasses of crystal set with precious stones. The prince was wondering who the second place was for, when suddenly in came about a dozen cats, carrying guitars and rolls of music, who took their places at one end of the room, and under the direction of a cat who beat time with the roll of paper, began to mew in every imaginable key. Meow, 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 meow. Okay, sorry. And to draw their claws across the strings of the guitars, making the strangest kind of music that he could have heard. The prince hastily stopped up his ears, but even then the sight of these comical musicians set him into fits of laughter. What funny thing shall I see next? He said to himself, and instantly the door opened, and in came a tiny figure covered with a long black veil. It was conducted by 2 cats wearing black mantles and carrying swords, and a large party of cats followed, who brought in cages full of rats and mice. The prince was so astonished that he thought he must be dreaming, but the little figure came up to him and threw back its veil, and he saw that it was the loveliest little white cat it was possible to imagine. She looked very young and very sad, and in a sweet little voice that went straight to his heart she said to the prince, "King's son, you are welcome. The Queen of the Cats is glad to see you." "Lady Cat," replied the prince, "I thank you for receiving me so kindly, but surely you are no ordinary pussy cat. Indeed, the way you speak and the magnificence of your castle prove it plainly." "King's son," said the white cat, "I beg you to spare me these compliments, for I am not used to them. But now," she added, "let supper be served, and let the musicians be silent, as the prince does not understand what they are saying." So the mysterious hands began to bring in the supper. First they put on the table 2 dishes, one containing stewed pigeons, and the other a fricassee of fat mice. A sight of the latter made the prince feel as though he could not enjoy his supper at all. But the white cat, seeing this, assured him that the dishes intended for him were prepared in a separate kitchen, and he might quite be certain that they contained neither rats nor mice. And the prince felt so sure that she would not deceive him that he had no more hesitation in beginning. Presently he noticed that on the little paw that was next to him, the white cat wore a bracelet containing a portrait, and he begged to be allowed to look at it. To his great surprise, he found it represented an extremely handsome young man, who was so like himself that it might have been his own portrait. The white cat sighed as she looked at it, and seemed sadder than before. The prince dared not ask any questions for fear of displeasing her. So he began to talk about other things, and found that she was interested in all the subjects he cared for himself, and seemed to know quite well what was going on in the world. After supper they went into another room, which was fitted up for theatre, and the cats acted and danced for their amusement, and then the white cat said good night to him, and the hands conducted him into a room he had not seen before, hung with tapestry workings with butterfly wings of every color. There were mirrors that reached from the ceiling to the floor, and a little white bed with curtains of gauze tied up with ribbons. The prince went over to the bed in silence, but did not quite know how to begin a conversation with the hands that waited on him. In the morning he was awakened by a noise, confusion outside his window, and the hands came and quickly dressed him in hunting costume. When he looked out, all the cats were assembled in the courtyard, some leading greyhounds, some blowing horns, and the white cat was going out hunting. The hands led a wooden horse up to the prince, and seemed to expect him to mount it, at which he was very indignant, but it was no use for him to object, for he speedily found himself on its back, and it pranced gaily off with him. The white cat herself was riding a monkey, which climbed even up the eagle's nest when she had a fancy to see young eaglets. Never was there a pleasanter hunting party, and when they returned to the castle, the prince and the white cat supped together as before, and when they had finished, she offered him a crystal goblet, which must have been contained some magic draught, for as soon as he swallowed its contents, he forgot everything, even the little dog that he was seeking for the king, and only thought of how happy he was with the white cat. And so the days passed in every kind of amusement until the year was nearly gone. The prince had forgotten all about his meeting with his brothers. He did not even know what country he belonged to. But the white cat knew when he ought to go back, and one day she said to him,
"Do you know that you only have 3 days left to look for the little dog for your father, and your brothers have found lovely ones?"
Then the prince suddenly recovered his memory and cried,
"What can have made me forget such an important thing? My whole fortune depends on it, and even if I could in such a short time find a pretty dog enough to gain me a kingdom, where should I find a horse who could carry me all the way to the 3 days?"
and he began to be very vexed. But the white cat said to him,
"King's son, do not trouble yourself. I am your friend, and will make everything easy for you. You can stay here for a day, and as the good wooden horse can take you to your country in 12 hours."
"I thank you, beautiful cat," said the prince, "but what good will it do me to get back if I have not a dog to give my father?"
"See here," answered the pretty cat, holding up an acorn. "There's a prettier one in this than the dog star."
"Oh, white cat, dear," said the prince, "how unkind you are to laugh at me now."
"Now listen,"
she said, holding the acorn to his ear. Inside it he distinctly heard a tiny voice say,
"Wow, wow."
The prince was delighted, for a dog that can be shut up in an acorn must be very small indeed. He wanted to take it out and look at it, but the white cat said it would be better not to open the acorn before he was before the king, in case the tiny dog should be cold on the journey. He thanked her 1,000 times and said goodbye quite sadly when the time came for him to set out. The days have passed so quickly with you, he said. I only wish I could take you with me now. But the white cat shook her head and sighed deeply in answer. After all, the prince was the first to arrive at the castle where he had agreed to meet his brothers. But they came soon after and stared in amazement when they saw the wooden horse in the courtyard, jumping like a hunter. The prince met them joyfully, and they began to tell all their adventures. But he managed to hide from them what he had been doing, and even led them to think that a turnspit dog which he had found with him was the one he was bringing for the king. Fond as they were altogether of one another, the two eldest could not help being glad to think that their dogs certainly had a better chance. The next morning they started in the same chariot. The elder brothers carried the baskets, such two tiny fragile dogs that they had hardly dared to touch them. As for the turnspit, he ran after the chariot, and got so covered with mud that one could hardly see that he was like it all. When they reached the palace, everyone crowded around to welcome them as they went into the king's great hall. And when the two brothers presented their little dogs, nobody could decide which was the prettier. They were already arranging between themselves to share the kingdom equally, when the youngest stepped forward, drawing from his pocket the acorn the white cat had given him. He opened it quickly, and there upon a white cushion they saw a dog, so small that it could have easily been put through a ring. The prince laid it upon the ground, and it got up at once and began to dance. The king did not know what to say, for it was impossible that anything could be prettier than this little creature. Nevertheless, he was in no hurry to part with his crown. He told his sons that, as they had been so successful the first time, he would ask them to go once again, and seek by land and sea for a piece of muslin so fine that it could be drawn through the eye of a needle. The brothers were not willing to set out again, but the two eldest consented because it gave them another chance, and they started as before. The youngest again mounted the wooden horse and rode back at full speed to his beloved white cat. Every door of the castle stood wide open, and every window and turret was illuminated, so it looked more wonderful than before. The hands hastened to meet him, and led a wooden horse off to the stable, while he hurried to find the white cat. She was asleep in a little basket on a white satin cushion, but she soon started up when she heard the prince, and was overjoyed at seeing him once more.
"How could I hope that you would come back to me, king's son?" she said.
And then he stroked and petted her, and told her of his successful journey, and now he had come back to ask her help, as he believed that it was impossible to find what the king demanded. The white cat looked serious, and said she must think what was to be done, but that, luckily, there were some cats in the castle who could spin very well, and if anyone could manage it, they could, and she would set them to the task. And then the hands appeared carrying torches, and conducted the prince and the white cat to a long gallery which overlooked the river, from the windows of which they saw a magnificent display of fireworks of all sorts, after which they had supper, which the prince liked even better than the fireworks, for it was very late, and he was hungry after his long ride. And so the days passed quickly as before. It was impossible to feel dull with the white cat, and she had quite a talent for inventing new amusements. Indeed, she was cleverer than a cat has any right to be. But when the prince asked how it was that she was so wise, she only said,
"King's son, do not ask me. Guess what you please. I may not tell you anything."
The prince was so happy that he did not trouble himself at all about the time, but presently the white cat told him that the year was gone, and that he need not be anxious about the piece of muslin, as they had made it very well.
"This time," she added, I can give you a suitable escort.
And on looking out into the courtyard, the prince saw a superb chariot of burnished gold, enameled in flame color with 1,000 different devices. It was drawn by 12 snow-white horses, harnessed four abreast. Their trappings were flame-colored velvet, embroidered with diamonds. 100 chariots followed, each drawn by 8 horses, and filled with officers in splendid uniforms, and 1,000 guards surrounded in procession.
Go, said the White Cat, and when you appear before the king in such a state, he surely will not refuse you the crown which you deserve. Take this walnut, but do not open it until you are before him. Then you will find in it the piece of stuff you asked me for.
Lovely Blanchette, said the prince, how can I thank you properly for all the kindness to me? Only tell me that you wish it, and I will give up forever all thought of being king, and will stay here with you always.
King's son, she replied, it shows the goodness of your heart that you should care so much for a little white cat, who is good for nothing but to catch mice. But you must stay not.
The prince kissed her little paw and set out. You can imagine how fast he traveled when I tell you that they reached the king's palace in just half the time it had taken the wooden horse to get there. So, 6 hours. This time the prince was so late that he did not try to meet the brothers at the castle, so they thought he could not be coming, and were rather glad of it, and displayed their pieces of muslin to the king proudly, feeling sure of their success. And indeed the stuff was very fine, and would go through the eye of a very large needle, but the king, who was only too glad to make a difficulty, sent for a particular needle, which was kept among the crown jewels, and had such a small eye that everybody saw at once that it was impossible that the muslin should pass through it. The princes were angry, and were beginning to complain that it was a trick, when suddenly the trumpet sounded, and the youngest prince came in. His father and brothers were quite astonished at his magnificence, and after he was greeted them, and took out the walnut from his pocket and opened it, fully expecting to find a piece of muslin, but instead there was only a hazelnut. He cracked it, and there lay a cherry stone. Everybody was looking on, and the king was chuckling to himself at the idea of finding a piece of muslin in a nutshell. However, the prince cracked the cherry stone, but everyone laughed when they saw it contained only a kernel. He opened that and found a grain of wheat, and in that was a millet seed. Then he himself began to wonder, and muttered softly, White cat, are you making fun of me? In an instant he felt a cat's claw give his hand quite a sharp scratch, and hoping that it meant as an encouragement, he opened the millet seed, and drew out a piece of muslin 400 ells long, woven with the loveliest color and most wonderful patterns, and when the needle was brought it went through the eye 6 times with the greatest ease. The king turned pale, and the other princes stood silent and sorrowful, for nobody could deny that this was the most marvelous piece of muslin that was ever to be found in the world. Presently the king turned to his sons and said, with a deep sigh, Nothing can console me more in my old age than to realize your willingness to gratify my wishes. Go then once more, and whoever at the end of a year can bring back the loveliest princess shall be married to her, and shall, without further delay, receive the crown, for my successor must certainly be married. Yeah. The prince considered that he had earned the kingdom fairly twice over, but was still too well-bred to argue it out. So he just went back to his gorgeous chariot, and surrounded by his escort, returned to the White Cat faster than he had come. This time she was expecting him, The path was strewn with flowers, and 1,000 braziers were burning scented wood which perfumed the air. Seated in a gallery from which she could see his arrival, the white cat waited for him. "Well, king's son," she said, "here you are once more without a crown." "Madam," said he, "thanks to your generosity I have earned one twice over, but the fact is that my father is so loath to part with it, it would be no more pleasure to me to take it." "Never mind," she answered. "It's just as well to try and deserve it. As you must take back the lovely princess with you next time, I will be on the lookout for one for you. In the meantime, let us enjoy ourselves. Tonight I have ordered a battle between my cats and the river rats on purpose to amuse you." So this year slipped away even more pleasantly than the preceding ones. Sometimes the prince could not help asking the white cat how it was she could talk. "Perhaps you are a fairy," he said, "or some enchanter changed you into a cat." But she only gave him answers that told him nothing. Cat. Days go by quickly when one is very happy, and that is certain of the prince would never have thought of it being time to go back. When one evening they sat together, the white cat said to him that if he wanted to take a lovely princess home with him, the next day he must be prepared to do what she told him. "Take this sword," she said, "and cut off my head." "I," cried the prince, "I cut off your head? Blanchette, darling, how could I do it?" "I entreat you to do as I tell you, king's son," she replied. The tears came into the prince's eyes as he begged her to ask him anything but that, to set him any task she pleased as proof of his devotion, but to spare him the grief of killing his dear pussy. But nothing he could say altered her determination, and at last he drew his sword, and desperately, with a trembling hand, cut off the little white head. But imagine his astonishment and delight when suddenly a lovely princess stood before him, and while he was still speechless with amazement, the door opened, and a goodly company of knights and ladies entered, each carrying a cat's skin. They hastened with every sign of joy to the princess, kissing her hand and congratulating her on being once more restored to her natural shape. She received them graciously, but after a few minutes begged that they would leave her alone with the prince, to whom she said, "You see, prince, that you are right in supposing me no ordinary cat. My father reigned over 6 kingdoms. The queen, my mother, whom he loved dearly, had a passion for traveling and exploring, and when I was only a few weeks old she obtained his permission to visit a certain mountain of which she had heard many marvelous tales, and set out, taking with her a number of her attendants. On the way they had to pass near an old castle belonging to the fairies. Nobody had ever been into it, but it was reported to be full of the most wonderful things, and my mother remembered to have heard of the fairies that had their garden such fruits as were to be seen and tasted nowhere else. She began to wish to try them herself, and turned her steps in the direction of the garden. On arriving at the door, which blazed with gold and jewels, she ordered her servants to knock loudly, but it was useless. It seemed as if all the inhabitants of the castle must be asleep or dead. Now the more difficult it became to obtain the fruit, the more the queen was determined to have what she could. So she ordered that they bring ladders and get over the walls of the garden. But though the wall did not look very high, and they tied the ladders together to make them very long, it was quite impossible to get to the top. The queen was in despair, but as night was coming she ordered that they should encamp there just as they were, and were to bed herself, feeling quite ill. She was so disappointed. In the middle of the night she was suddenly awakened, and saw to her surprise a tiny, ugly old woman seated by her bedside, who said to her, "I must say that we consider it somewhat troublesome of your majesty to insist upon tasting our fruit.
But to save you the annoyance, my sisters and I consent to give you as much as you can carry away, on one condition. That is, that you shall give us your little daughter to bring up as our own.
Ah, my dear madam, cried the queen, is there nothing else you will take from the fruit? I will give you my kingdoms willingly.
No,
replied the old fairy.
We will have nothing but your little daughter. She will be as happy as the day is long, and we will give her everything that is worth having in Fairyland. But you must not see her again until she is married.
Though it is a hard decision, said the queen, I consent, for I shall certainly die if I do not taste the fruit, and so I should lose my little daughter either way. So the old fairy led her into the castle, and though it was still the middle of the night, the queen could see plainly that it was far more beautiful than she had been told. Which you can easily believe, Prince, said the white cat, when I tell you that it was this castle that we are in now. Will you gather the fruit yourself, Queen? Said the old fairy.
Or shall I allow it to come to you? Oh, Ingrid, I beg you to let it come to me when you called, cried the queen. That will be something quite new.
The old fairy whistled twice and cried,
Apricots, peaches, nectarines, cherries, plums, pears, melons, grapes, apples, oranges, lemons, gooseberries, strawberries, raspberries, snozzberries, come!
and in a great instant they were tumbling one over another, and yet they were neither dusty nor spoilt, and the queen found them quite as good as she had fancied them. You see, they grew upon fairy trees. The old fairy gave her golden baskets in which to take the fruit away, and it was as much as 400 mules could carry. Then she reminded the queen of her agreement, and led her back to the camp. And next morning she went back to her kingdom, but before she had gone very far she began to repent of her bargain. And when the king came out to meet her, she looked sad as he had guessed that something had happened, and asked her what was the matter. At first the queen was afraid to tell him, but when, as soon as they reached the palace, 5 frightful little dwarfs were sent by the fairies to fetch me, she was obliged to confess what she had promised. The king was very angry, and had the queen and myself shut up in a great tower, and safely guarded, and drove the little dwarfs out of his kingdom. But the fairy sent a great dragon who ate up all the people he met, and whose breath burnt up everything as he passed through the country. And at last, after trying in vain to rid himself of this monster, the king, to save his subjects, was obliged to consent that I should be given up to the fairies. This time they came themselves to fetch me, in a chariot of pearl drawn by sea-horses, followed by the dragon, who was led by chains of diamonds. My cradle was placed between the old fairies, who loaded me with caresses, and away we whirled through the air to the tower which they held on purpose for me. There I grew up surrounded with everything that was beautiful and rare, and learning everything that is ever taught to a princess, but without any companions but a parrot and a little dog who could both talk, and receiving every day a visit from one of the old fairies, who came mounted upon the dragon. One day, however, as I sat by my window, I saw a handsome young prince, who seemed to have been hunting in the forests and surrounding my prison, and who was standing and looking up at me. When he saw that I observed him, he saluted me with great deference. You can imagine that I was delighted to have someone new to talk to, and in spite of the height of my window, and our conversation was prolonged till night fell. Then my prince reluctantly bade me farewell. But after he came again many times, and at last I consented to marry him. But the question was how I was to escape my tower. The fairies always supplied me with flax for my spinning, and with great diligence I made enough cord for a ladder that would reach the foot of the tower. But alas, just as my prince was helping me to descend it, the crossest and ugliest of the old fairies flew in. Before he had time to defend himself, my unhappy lover was swallowed up by the dragon,
And as for me, the fairies, furious at having their plans defeated, for they intended to marry me to the king of the dwarfs, and I utterly refused, changed me into a white cat. Then they brought me here. I found all the lords and ladies of my father's court awaiting me here under the same enchantment, while the people of lesser rank had been made invisible, all but their hands. As they laid me under the enchantment, the fairies told me all my history, for until then I quite believed I was their child, and warned me that only a chance of regaining my natural form was to win the love of a prince who resembled in every way my unfortunate lover.
And you have won it, my lovely princess, interrupted the prince.
You are indeed wonderfully like him, resumed the princess. And voice, and features, and everything. If you really love me, all my troubles will be at an end.
And mine too, cried the prince, throwing himself at her feet, if you will consent to marry me.
I love you already better than anyone in the world, she said. But now it is time to go back to your father, and we shall hear what he says about it.
So the prince gave her his hand and led her out, and they mounted the chariot together. It was even more splendid than before, and so was the whole company. Even the horse's shoes were rubies with diamond nails, and I suppose that is the first time such a thing was ever seen. Ruby horseshoes as opposed to silver slippers. As the princess was kind and clever as she was beautiful, you can imagine what delightful journey the prince found it, for everything the princess said seemed to him quite charming. When they came near the castle where the brothers were to meet, the princess got into a chair carried by 4 of the guards, and was hewn out of one splendid crystal, and had silken curtains which she drew round her that she might not be seen. The prince saw his brothers walking upon the terrace, each with a lovely princess, and they came to meet him, asking if he had also found a wife. He said that he had found something much rarer, a white cat. At which they laughed very much, and asked him if he was afraid to being eaten up by mice in the palace. And then they set out together for town. Each prince and princess rode in a splendid carriage. The horses were decked with plumes of feathers and glittered with gold. After them came the youngest prince, and last of all, the crystal chair, at which everyone looked with admiration and curiosity. When the courtiers saw them coming, they hastened to tell the king. "Are the ladies beautiful?" he asked anxiously. And when they answered that nobody had ever before seen such lovely princesses, he seemed quite annoyed. However, he received them graciously, but found it impossible to choose between them. Then, turning to his youngest, he said, "Have you come back all alone after all?" "Your Majesty," replied the prince, "will find that in a crystal chair a little white cat, which has such soft paws and mews so prettily, that I am sure you will be charmed with it." The king smiled and went to draw back the curtains himself, but at the touch from a princess the crystal shivered into 1,000 splinters, and there stood, in all her beauty, her hair fair floated about her shoulders, and she was crowned with flowers, and her softly falling robe was of the purest white. She saluted the king gracefully, while a murmur of admiration rose from all around. "Sire," she said, "I am come not to deprive you of a throne you fill so worthily. I have already 6 kingdoms. Permit me to bestow one upon you, and upon each of your sons. I ask nothing but your friendship, and your consent to marry with your youngest son. We shall still have 3 kingdoms left for ourselves." And the king and all the courtiers could not conceal their joy and astonishment, and the marriage of the 3 princes were celebrated at once. The festivities lasted several months. Then each king and queen departed to their own kingdom, and lived You guessed it. Happily ever after. I need to find me a white cat. I'll just have black ones. Not that I ever want to be turned human. If that kind of thing were to happen to me, I would just, be a regular wolf again. But that was our tales for this evening. I would like to thank you all for being here. Now we shall go on yet another quest to find out who to raid. For this kingdom. Okay, it's not really a kingdom. It's a bookstore. But let's see who was on that we may share our joy and wonder with, so that they too may live happily ever after. I see that Dusk is on, playing the Pokemon. Let's see, anyone reading? I see Pixel Doctor is still playing Pokemon. He has been at that thing all day. I see Altered is on. It says he's just chatting. Let me take a peek on what he's doing. How many people are playing Pokemon right now? I mean, honestly. Driftnut is playing Fable 3. They must catch them all, for that is the way of things. Well, let's see what Altered's doing. Wow, Altered is... Yeah, let's raid him. Just because I want to. So, I would like to thank all of you wonderful cubs for coming in. And... oh, why am I not on there? Oh, well. Anyway, cubs, we will be rating Altered, who is reading. So I will see all of you wonderful cubs later. Actually, we'll have to figure out if I'm doing anything next week because holidays and such. I might be out of town. I don't know. I will let you know on Twitter, should it still exist. So, have a good night, cubs. Sweet dreams.